The clock on the Berlin Town Hall Tower in November 1923 was ticking at the same speed as it had 100 years earlier, but time for the German economy was beginning to be measured in millions of percent per day. This was not just inflation. This was the terminal stage of an information catastrophe. When money begins to lie, it ceases to be a bridge between people and becomes an abyss. Imagine receiving your salary twice a day, and your wife is forced to run to the store before you have time to close the shop door because in an hour the price of eggs will increase by another 100 million marks. In this chaos, the signal noise of official reports turns into the white noise of the death of capital. But it was in this epicenter of collapse that the concept of monetary translation appeared. The ability to see the gap between the official lie and the real price of a physical asset allowed individuals not only to survive, but to buy up an entire empire for next to nothing. We begin the Weimar method autopsy to give you a scalpel to help you cut through the fog of the coming chaos of 2026. There is a specific mental technology we call monetary translation. It is a skill that costs nothing today, but in 2026 it will be your only existential lever in a world where official figures have completely lost touch with physical reality. It is the ability to see the real price signal where everyone else sees only the signal noise of state propaganda. But before we reveal the mechanics of this method, you must ask yourself one cruel question. Do you really believe that your degree, your position, and your market understanding acquired in times of stability will help you when the rules of the game change overnight? Are you willing to admit that your institutional dependence is your greatest vulnerability? Write in the comments right now what you would do first if tomorrow morning you saw that the price of bread in your store had doubled, and your bank withdrawal limits were limited to $10 per day. This is not just an exercise in imagination. It is a forensic handwriting of history, which repeats itself with frightening accuracy every time the fiat experiment reaches its logical conclusion. Your knowledge today is either your salvation or your sentence. But here is the part that no one tells you about in the financial reports. Hyperinflation is not an economic phenomenon. It is primarily an information catastrophe. In a stable world, money works as a perfect translator of value. You know how many hours of your life a cup of coffee or a car costs. During a collapse, this translator begins to lie. The official price becomes just a facade behind which emptiness is hidden. The Weimar method that allowed a handful of people to not just survive but become incredibly wealthy in the ruins of an empire was to understand the time lag between the printing press going into overdrive and the moment the market realized the true extent of the depreciation. Think about that for a moment before we go any further. Wealth flows from those who believe the official numbers to those who can calculate the real value of assets through hard units of exchange. This is monetary translation in action. We do economic autopsies here so you don't become the next case in the collapse report if you feel like your ability to see reality is starting to conflict with what's being broadcast to you through your smartphone screens. Subscribe to this channel. We examine the forensic evidence of the financial devastation that institutions try to hide behind complex terminology and manipulative statistics. Subscribe if you are ready to adopt anti-fragility as your new life strategy before the alarm noise drowns out the remnants of common sense. Let's take a look inside the Weimar dissection. In 1920, a German industrialist named Hugo Stinnes realized something that the country's best economists were reluctant to admit. He saw that Germany's national debt had become so large that the only way to service it was to print endless new marks. Stinnes began to use the existential leverage of debt. He took out huge loans in paper marks to immediately buy real physical assets: coal mines, steel mills, newspapers, and shipping companies. When the time came to repay the loans, the mark depreciated by millions of percent. He paid back the debts with garbage, leaving behind the foundation of the country's industrial power. This was not speculation in the classical sense. It was a surgical dissection of a system that was destroying itself. He understood that the mark was a derivative asset and steel and coal were the underlying reality. But here's the part that will never be written about in the textbooks. Stinnes didn't just buy factories. He bought informational advantage. His method was based on the understanding that price is just a thought that is constantly lagging behind the fact of money being issued. In 2026, we will see the same process, but on a global scale. $315 trillion of world debt cannot be paid off. It can only be burned in the fire of a new great inflation. The only question is whether you will be the one holding the paper that is burning or the one who owns the machine that creates real goods. The forensic script of history remains the same. Only the scenery changes. Let's go to Buenos Aires in the late 20th century, Florida Street, where hundreds of people called arbolitos, or little trees, stand. They have stood there for decades, shouting the word cambio, exchange. This is the living infrastructure of monetary translation. In Argentina, the official dollar exchange rate has always been a lie, created to drain resources from the population. The arbolitos were the ones who gave the people the real price signal. They understood that when the state says everything is under control, it means that control is already lost. The ability to use the parallel market, the understanding that the real price of an asset is determined not at the central bank, but at the moment of its physical exchange for something necessary for life. This is a critical survival skill in conditions of market fragmentation. Your economics degree or financial analyst certificate in 2026 may be your biggest legal hurdle. Why? Because institutional dependency forces you to look for logic where there is none. You will be waiting for a quarterly report or a Federal Reserve decision, while the market on the street has already adjusted to a new coordinate system. Monetary translation is the ability to cast aside illusions and work with facts. Fact 1. Paper money is a fiat experiment with zero survival rate in the long run. Fact 2. In a collapse, the winner is the one with the least distance to the real asset. Fact 3. Real price information is the most valuable commodity when the official channels start broadcasting only noise. Think about it for a moment. In 1923, a librarian in Germany could earn a salary that was enough for a kilo of butter in the morning and only enough for a match in the evening. This was because he was a prisoner of the institutional payment system. The speculator at the train station, who exchanged 1 Swiss franc for a sack of potatoes, was making a monetary translation. He knew that the franc was a stable reference point and the mark was just a falling stone. Today we live in a world where all reference points are starting to move simultaneously. This creates an information deficit of a magnitude that humanity has never known. Do you believe that gold is your salvation? But gold also has a price in paper units, which can be manipulated through the derivatives market. The real Weimar method is to see the gap between the price of paper gold on the screen and the real price of the physical coin in the hands of a jeweler on a dark street. This gap is your future wealth or your future ruin. History has left us lessons written in blood and depreciated pieces of paper. In every major crisis, a layer of people emerges who become monetary translators. They don't create a product, they create clarity in chaos. They understand that when a system breaks down into fragments, each fragment has its own rate of decline. The ability to move from an asset that is falling faster to one that is falling slower, or even growing, is not magic, it is the mathematics of survival. In 2026, we will see the emergence of new arbolitos, but in the digital space. They will work on the gap between the official digital currencies of central banks and real decentralized assets. Institutional dependence on state payment systems will become a trap for those who have not learned to translate their efforts into anti-fragile forms of capital. Let's delve deeper into the pathology of the system. Hyperinflation is the moment when a state admits its bankruptcy to its citizens, but does so not through legal procedure, but through the destruction of the measure of value. This is the global redistribution of wealth. Have you been saving for retirement all your life? You have simply given your labor to a system that will burn it overnight to plug the holes in its balance sheet. The Weimar method teaches us to be ruthless in our conclusions. If an asset cannot be held in your hands, or if its value depends on the signature of an official, it is a derivative asset. It is not wealth, it is the promise of wealth that will be cancelled first. But here's the part that no one tells you about in financial academia. During a collapse, a phenomenon occurs that we call price fragmentation. A loaf of bread can cost one amount in one part of the city and 3 times as much in another, simply because the information about the new money issue has not yet reached all sellers. A monetary translator is someone who moves faster than information. He is someone who sees a pattern where others see only an accident. Do you think that is immoral? History knows no morality. It only knows consequences. In 1923, moral people starved to death while holding millions of honestly earned marks in their hands. People who understood the nature of the fiat experiment survived and built new dynasties. Think about this very seriously. We are approaching a point where the complexity of global finance will exceed the ability of any central bank to control. When that happens, the signal noise will turn into white noise. You will not know how much your real estate is worth, your car, or your job. You will be in a state of complete monetary blindness. And that is when those who have retained the ability to monetary translation will enter the scene. This is not about buying Bitcoin or gold. It's about the ability to instantly assess the real value of one asset relative to another, bypassing the deceptive intermediary of a state currency. This is the existential lever of the future. The forensic handwriting of history shows that every major inflation starts small, a small information deficit, a slight manipulation of statistics, a promise that everything is under control. Then comes a moment of phase transition, when the quantity of money printed turns into a qualitative change in the consciousness of the masses. Money ceases to be a means of saving and becomes a hot potato that must be disposed of as quickly as possible. At this point, your institutional addiction becomes deadly. If you are used to getting paid once a month, you have already lost. In November 1923, workers in Germany were getting paid twice a day, and their wives were waiting at the factory gates to rush to the stores before prices rose another 10 million marks during the lunch break. This is the physical reality of monetary translation. What can you do today to prepare for 2026? First, study the anatomy of past crashes. Don't listen to those who say this time will be different. Technology changes, but the human psychology and mathematics of debt remain the same. Second, start looking for your own price signals. How much is your time really worth in terms of energy, food, or hard metals? Stop thinking in terms of currency that is printed by the trillions. Third, develop skills that are anti-fragile, those that have value regardless of the state of the banking system. Your ability to do economic dissection and see the hidden mechanics of the market is your true capital. The Weimar method is not a stock-buying manual. It is a philosophy of survival in a system that is collapsing. It is the understanding that wealth is not about numbers on a screen, but about control over resources and information. When you hear the alarm bells ringing about stability and economic recovery, think of the bank director from Berlin in 1923. He too believed in numbers. He too considered speculators to be ignorant savages. But history has put everything in its place. The savages survived because they worked with reality. The experts died because they worked with illusions. Think about this for a moment before we end this autopsy. We are living in the greatest fiat experiment in human history. Never before has the world been so interconnected and so dependent on paper promises. This means that the coming collapse will not be local, but systemic. The redistribution of wealth will occur so rapidly that most people will not even have time to realize where their savings have disappeared to. Only those who master the technique of monetary translation will be able to see a way through this fog. They will see a price signal where everyone else sees only the end of the world. This is something that will never be written about in textbooks, but it is the knowledge that is passed down from those who have been through Weimar, Argentina, Zimbabwe, and Venezuela. It is the knowledge that the system is not your friend. The system is a predator that feeds on your trust and your labor. Monetary translation is your only chance to stop being a prey. It is your chance to become the architect of your own survival on the ruins of old institutions. Be vigilant. Don't let the noise of the alarm blind your ability to analyze. The forensic handwriting of history is already visible on the walls of today's financial temples. $315 trillion in debt is not just a number. It is a sentence on the system as it stands. The collapse of 2026 is already written into the genetic code of our macroeconomic model. The only question is whether you will be the object of the autopsy or the one holding the scalpel. We are finishing this economic autopsy, but your education is just beginning. Start looking at the world through the prism of monetary translation. Look for real value behind the facade of paper prices. Strengthen your anti-fragility, and remember, in a world where everything is crumbling, the greatest value is your ability to see the truth and act on it. See you in the next autopsy, where we'll delve even deeper into the mechanics of how entire asset classes disappear and what's left in their place. Protect your capital, and may your mind always be sharper than any crisis. History has all the answers. You just need to know how to read them.